Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's briefing event in which we'll discuss what the post-pandemic workplace will look like. We're really pleased to be joining with BT and the NICS for today's discussion, and indeed we're very grateful to BT for facilitating our very high-tech and socially distanced facilities for today's discussion. Our panellists are Sue Galoo and Brent Matthews, who are leading BT's Better Workplace project, a project that predates the pandemic. And also Derek Kennedy from the Strategic Investment Board, who is currently embedded with the NICS to lead the New Ways of Working project. And Derek and his team in the SIB are also available to the wider public sector for these issues and discussions as well. Our CEF Chair, David Sterling, and BT's Regional Director, Paul Murnahan, will lead today's discussion. But as always, we'd like this to be an interactive event. So if you could enable your Zoom chat function, and please feel free to pop in any questions or queries or comments there. We'll be able to see it here in the studio, and we'll endeavour to come to everyone and cover all of your issues before the discussion concludes at 12:30 this afternoon. So we are recording today's session as well, if you could bear that in mind with your comments. At that, I'm going to hand over to our Chair, David Sterling, to get us started.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so much interest in this. I think it is clearly something that touches all of us. Great to be here in person. I've put a suit on for the first time in a long time. I couldn't quite go as far as a tie, but there you go. Special thanks to Paul, to Sue and to Brent from BT for facilitating this. It's really, really good. We're really, really grateful to you for that. In preparing for this, I sort of looked back just over 12 months ago to some key dates from last year. 13th of January, the executive were restored, ministers were back. And actually it was the Friday of that week, the 17th of January, that was the first time the First Minister and Deputy First Minister were out at a public meeting, and it was the Chinese New Year celebrations. And I remember speaking to the Consul General and asking her about this reported virus in Wuhan in China, and she assured me it was all under control and there was nothing to worry about. Roll forward to the 28th of February, I think it was, and we had a civil service board meeting, and the Chief Medical Officer gave us a presentation, and by that stage things were clearly ramping up around the world. But we were actually quite shocked as a group when we heard the possibility that people might have to be confined to their homes and left out of their workplaces. And to be honest, a lot of us, I'm not sure we actually really believed it. And yet, 23rd of March, UK went into full lockdown. Life comes at you fast, as they say. Now, we were already changing our ways of working, but overnight they had to change completely, and they did. And I just want to pay a tribute to all former civil service colleagues of mine, but everybody across the public sector for the way in which they responded. It was magnificent. I think it was probably a few weeks as we really struggled to come to terms with this, but then the slow realization dawned that actually we were never going to go back to the way things were before. And I think the challenge for us is in readjusting to the future. I don't quite like the term getting back to work because people have been at work. It's not as if they haven't been at work. And what we'll be doing this morning is hearing how in different ways we might be able to capture the productivity gains, the other good things that have arisen in terms of our response to the pandemic, but really address a lot of the negative things that have happened as well. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion this morning. Paul?
Thanks very much, David and Anne, and to Derek, Brent and Sue also. And from BT's perspective, we're delighted to continue our relationship with the Chief Execs Forum. I've said many a time that BT is really important to Northern Ireland, but Northern Ireland is also really important to BT, and getting the opportunity in terms of thought leadership to share some of the things that we do at times like this is really important to me, to ensure that the broader customer base, and in this instance the broader public sector, can get some learnings from some of the things that maybe we are doing in our world. And with me today I've got Brent Matthews, who will introduce himself, but is responsible for the property estate for BT, and Sue Glue, who is running a programme of work known colloquially in BT as the Better Workplace Programme. And pre-COVID, pre-March of last year, BT had embarked on a programme of work to transform its property estate, something that was maybe 20 years 20 years in its gestation, and Brent will talk a little bit more to that. But in essence, we're looking to consolidate and to go large in some particular areas to make sure that we have an environment, physical and emotional, for people to connect better and to do a better job for our customers at the end of the day, and to work better together. And in conversations with David and with Anne, we thought that bringing that conversation to you as the members of the Chief Execs Forum, and sharing a little bit about that transformational change programme that BT is going through, and then adopting the COVID very specific and how it has changed some of the thinking, and how we are adapting our workplace as we, like yourselves, are beginning to consider how do we bring our people back to work, that this would be a timely intervention. And for me, it's an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask us questions, rather than me ask and David ask all the questions. And clearly with Derek as well from SIB, and the fantastic work that's already been done in the NICS, to share some experiences, but really to help answer any questions that you folks have at home. So please do come forward with your questions. But if I could, Brent, just start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about BT's Better Workplace Programme in the first instance?
Yeah, hi Paul. Thanks. First of all, I guess good morning to everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with you all. As you sort of suggested in your introduction there, the Better Workplace Programme was probably 20 years in its gestation within BT, by which we mean that it's a good 20 years since we last had a proper investment programme in our property portfolio. And in that time, we've seen, I guess, work change a lot and technology change a lot, and certainly our buildings have changed a lot, and that they've deteriorated a lot. So we had a realization a few years ago, I guess, that our property portfolio was definitely wasn't helping us progress as a business, but actually was really hindering us progress as a business. We had more than sort of 800-900 different buildings and locations where people were trying to work from, and we had our UK-based workforce dispersed all over the place. And that brings sort of technological challenges if you're trying to roll out new technologies. It brings behavioural challenges with it, and it definitely brings property challenges trying to maintain sort of upwards of 1,000 buildings for people to work in, as well as the 5,000 odd telephone exchanges we've got in the UK. So we embarked pre-COVID on a program to consolidate that property portfolio from the sort of hundreds and hundreds of buildings down to, we said about 30, because on a program with a scale, you never want to be too precise, but we had to scale it somehow. So we have about 30 locations that we're investing very heavily in from a property perspective, and from a technology perspective, I guess. And that's a sort of a 5-year body of work that we kicked off pre-COVID. The idea is then, having created fantastic workspaces, to consolidate all of our work-based colleagues into those buildings, which enables them to work much better together, and then us to also sort of invest and maintain in those properties. But we talked about it, and we realized very early on that although it sounds a lot like a property program, and certainly if you let me talk about it, it's going to come across as a property program, but actually it's not a property program at all. We realized very early that this was actually a people program, and actually probably more importantly a culture change program. So probably very wisely we kicked off the property elements, but we brought on a lot of support from the business on how to actually make this successful to land with our colleagues. And that's, I think, only become more important given what's happened since. But that's why, although I'm busy every day on this program, I'm definitely not in charge of it. And we've got someone much more capable than I running the program.
Very good, and that's a nice segue to Sue Glue, our other guest. And Sue has the ultimate responsibility for delivering the Better Workplace Programme. So what Brent has said, Sue, all sounds great, right? What's it really like?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. What it's really like is, well, we kind of thought that this was hard before, and then a pandemic arrived. So it's definitely been a very roller coaster journey. I think the main thing for running a programme of this scale and this structure for BT is Brent's given an outline there of the scale and complexity of it. Is when we started, we did know that flexibility was going to be key, whether that was in our about 30, about how many buildings, about building layout, about the approach. And that's really, really been true and has been massively amplified, of course, by the recent months and years. So I think what it's really like is it is a massive people programme. We have a vision statement for the programme, which I always think of in 3 parts. It's bringing people together in brilliant spaces that transform the way we work. The bringing people together bit is huge because we've 52,000 desk-based colleagues in all of these random places in the UK who are very used to working in that way. The brilliant spaces is I will say this, and Brent can hit me later, is sort of the easy bits because we can build amazing spaces, but we then need to get people to want to come to them. And the transform the way we work bit is the really critical bit. It is a culture change programme for BT. Our vision statement for the company is that we connect for good, and it's really hard to connect people and teams when they are dispersed. So we're really trying to connect our people physically in really great collaborative environments. But it comes with huge challenges from a people perspective, and I think they have been made worse by the pandemic in lots of ways and made better by the pandemic in lots of ways, because it's accelerated the way in which people think about flexibility and work more than any change programme could ever have done, really.
Different people over the years, and some are great advocates for flexible and agile working, and others are much more traditional in their sense. In the early stages of COVID, I remember a conversation, you folks may have well been party to it as well. Our group chief executive invited a few external colleagues along on a weekly basis to share what was going on in the external world, and the chief executive of NHSX came to talk to us probably about 6 weeks into COVID in mid-May, and he shared a very, very memorable experience for the NHS in England, where he talked about the ambition that they had pre-COVID to digitise a lot of what they did, to try and transform the way they worked. He talked about the general practice, the GPs, the dynamic that they had, where they were looking to provide a different technical solution to that problem that was massively costly and probably not the best solution for all of us as citizens. And they had an ambition in what was 2020 back then, by 2025, to have 80% of their GP practices, interventions, digitised. Within 6 weeks, they had 100% of them digitised. And then that was done down to COVID, right? And one of the good things that COVID has provided, and it's provided many bad, but it's provided us to think in a very different way and in a very can-do attitude. So we've a couple of slides or pictures, not slides, or visuals, maybe to set the scene and to help you talk to what it's going to mean for somebody like me who today works in an old telephone exchange in May Street in Telephone House, across the road from Goodwood House, where people would know well. One of the buildings that Derek and the team have done a fantastic job to accelerate the transformation in the NICS, and Derek will talk about that shortly. But from I'm one of those guys that's going to be asked to move from where I am today to these, what will be a fantastic new investment in Riverside Tower in Belfast. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what that new way of working will mean for people like me? And you won't need to convince me to jump out of an old telephone exchange and move into an invested building, but it's great for Belfast. It's great that Belfast has been chosen as one of the strategic hubs for BT. But what does it mean? And maybe share a little bit of experience that you can.
Sure, thanks, Paul. So the change to our working spaces is going to be really quite transformational for people. And Brent made a really good point. Just I think this week has been down to our current HQ in BT Centre, which is kind of one of our best buildings. But because Brent and I have spent quite a bit of time of late in our new buildings that are getting ready to be opened, it's kind of looked at BT Centre and said, my God, it's awful compared to what we are getting used to because we're seeing these new buildings. But it made me really pause to realise that for colleagues who are going into these new workspaces for the first time, it is really, really, really different. I mean, everything about it, the layout of the office, even the way they arrive at the office, even our security systems, the digital signage, the buildings will be smart buildings, so we'll use apps to book meeting rooms. The collaboration spaces are amazing. But for some people who are used to that and who love it and will run at it, which sounds like you might, Paul, that will be fabulous. But for people who actually quite like working in a telephone exchange in a little dark corner somewhere and, maybe go home at lunchtime and walk the dog and all of those other things, it will be quite a radical change, and we mustn't underestimate that. So we will be putting a lot of time and effort into the change and engagement and the adoption of the new technology and the new ways of working. But the visuals that we've brought just shows, Paul's rightly quite proud of how Riverside Tower looks. And I think one of the visuals that we've got, which hopefully we can share on the screen with you, just shows you what the property will look like from the front. Hands up, need to say I haven't been to it yet. We were meant to be here this week, but of course COVID had other plans. So I'm dying to get there and see it myself. But this is just the kind of artist's impression of what it will be like. I'm probably stealing Brent's thunder really, because it's all his hard work, not mine, that's got us to here. But we really want to. The location's fantastic, and it's the right building for us to be in. So we're looking forward to refurbishing it. That just gives you an idea of the outside. And then the next visuals will just show you a little bit about some of the kind of the internals. And again, I'm becoming very used to seeing these, but this is kind of the cafe, and you'll see how light and bright, and we've got a lot of the same sort of themes running through the building. Modern, open spaces, not the kind of BT purple everywhere that we've been a bit obsessed with over the years, but little colour pops. And Brent could talk a lot more than I could, but the design of the offices, which are very focused on well-being, light, air quality, being able to adjust temperatures and lighting for colleagues so that it's a really comfortable space that invites people to want to come back to the workplace. And then the next visual just is a little bit of a nod to how we've had to adapt to some of our thinking about layout. So when we started the programme, we have a lot of people in our 52,000 desk space who, quite sort of, traditional desk settings, rows of desks sitting at the laptops. And we've kind of got the desk focus one on the left of the image that you can see with, quite a lot of work points, so lots of people on one floor. And then on the very right-hand side, which is we're being accelerated to that quite a bit in some of our business units, is much more about collaboration space. It's much less conventional, so it will be unusual for colleagues who are not used to it. We're building, like if you're used to agile working with all of the language around Scrum Masters and agile squads and so on, we're kind of creating squad pods for people to work much more collaboratively. And the range of furniture will be really different. We've got stepped furniture where people can sit up on high. We've got round desks where people gather around them. We've got small workspaces. We've got solo pods. So a huge range of different furniture settings and different layout. And then some teams are really comfortable with the stuff on the left. Just give me a desk, let me come in, put my headphones on and do my job. Other teams are saying, we really will only want to come in if we want to collaborate, because I can do all that other stuff at home now, and I've proved that. So we're definitely seeing a range from the middle bit, which is a blend, to the fully collaborative. And what Brent and his team are thankfully and ably able to do is to kind of flex that and provide the right environment. One of my colleagues said, I will stay at home for head down work and I'll come to the office for heads up work. And I thought it was quite a neat description of, if I'm just going to have my head down all day, I can do that at my desk, and if not, I'd like to come in. So I'll stop, Paul. I could talk for hours.
No, I know. And Brent, you're delivering this project from a property perspective, but COVID has come along halfway through, and Sue's touched on some of the challenges that it's going to provide in terms of the layout. But from team leaders, from people who 18 months ago, 12 months ago would would have been considering moving from one office to another. They've now had a year of working from home, and we've all done it in our own ways, in our own places, be it your daughter's bedroom or the ironing board in the kitchen, through to fully fledged studies for those of us that are fortunate to have that. What do you believe the challenges are from a people perspective in terms of those that may be less comfortable coming back? What are we going to have to do? What are we going to have to dream and think about?
Thanks. Well, it's a really important question, actually, because I guess, as you say, roll back pre-pandemic, lots of people had lots of really strong ideas on how work had to happen, and we had pockets of really flexible approaches to work, but we also had teams that absolutely said you must be in the office 5 days a week, clock in at 8 o'clock, and don't leave till 5:30, and I'll be watching you. And overnight, that changed. That kind of proving we can work and actually proving we can be trusted to work from home was an instant imposition upon us, but has really opened people's eyes up to that. But given what we've all been through, as you say, some people have got very used to that. So we're expecting a huge variety, I guess, in people's enthusiasm about getting back into the workplace, varying from those of us who are desperate to get back into the workplace and will be sort of battering the door down on the morning it opens, through to those who are a lot more anxious about it, and will take it slowly. So I think we're sort of looking at it as a multifaceted problem to tackle. I think one of the things is going to be flexibility. We need to recognise that there are going to be people at different stages on that sort of change journey, and we need to be sympathetic to that, and recognise that. We're also, I guess, going to work really hard at giving people a positive reason to come into the workplace, be that team collaboration or some of the sort of well-being aspects around the workplace that we can offer that you can't offer at home. So there's going to be lots of activities sort of to encourage teams to get back together, and to demonstrate that actually the workplace is safe, is COVID secure. We've had the advantage, I guess, that we've had best part of 10,000 people coming into our workplaces the whole way through the pandemic globally, about 7,000 or 8,000 of those in the UK and 2,000 or 3,000 scattered across the rest of the world, plus our 30,000 or 40,000 sort of colleagues out in the field who've continued to work all the way through. So we've got lots of learnings from how to assure and reassure people that things are actually COVID secure and safe in the workplace. And we'll be sort of focusing on a lot of those to reassure people. And really it's about sort of over-indexing almost on the visible aspects of that. So the one-way systems, the extra cleaning, the contactless technologies that we've got in place in terms of just simple things like being able to order your lunch and then go and pick it up, having already paid for it on your app, things like that, so that we can, people can be assured that it is a safe work environment. But I guess coupling that with the fact that we're desperately hoping that as we move through the next month or two, that a lot of those restrictions will be falling away because the vaccination program's working well and the levels of COVID are much lower. But I think the key thing will be sort of that combination of giving people a reason to go into the workplace and then assuring them that it's safe and secure, COVID secure once you get there.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Brent. David?
Thanks. That was really good to hear that. I'm delighted again. We've got Derek Kennedy along with us this morning. Derek, you were Director of Property Management, but I think as a reflection of the changing times, your title is now Director of the Recovery Programme. Now,
That's right.
I recall you entertained the Permanent Secretary Group a couple of years ago in Goodwood, and you were setting out what the future of work would look like at that stage. Maybe you could just give us a sense of what the pandemic has done in terms of requiring an adjustment to that overall vision. And I think as our discussion develops, I think it's worthwhile remembering that many CEF members aren't necessarily in a large organisation. So are there any lessons that are going to be useful for people in a small organisation that would be helpful too?
Yeah, that's a great point, David. When we started pre-pandemic, the program started really about bricks and mortars, quite similarly to what Brent and Sue is doing, but really focusing on the rationalization and achieving the savings. And we realized that was not going to be possible unless we changed our focus from the bricks and mortar to the people. And so we started to work with our colleagues in CPD to create environments where we were trying to predict how people would work and how the workplace would evolve, evolving from one where it was workstation oriented to that which was collaboration oriented. And pre-COVID, we redesigned 2 floors in Goodwood House to test how this would work. We also gave complete flexibility to our staff on those floors to be able to come and go as they please and change that concept of work as a place that we go to rather something that we do. And again, we had the permsecs around to show them, because as I said, David, you challenged me 3 years ago in the summer of 2018 that, well, what does it actually look like? And in really trying to work through what did it look like, it became clear it wasn't just about the space, it was about what are the people doing in it and what are the things that we have to do to make that work. And it became clear that our approach to working was the key to this, how we thought about work and how people engage with their processes and the way they did their work needed a lot more consideration. We started, we finished that pilot in Goodwood and it was a great success, but it was just on such a small scale that to scale that up for the NICS, there was huge amounts of skepticism as to whether it's possible. Our business don't work this way. Colleagues in Department for Communities have a lot of call center staff and very large, and the need for people to keep information secure, and the best way to do that was within our office environment where we control things like printing and how information leaves our workplaces. But COVID hit, and that turned all of that on its head. From how we manage our information, our colleagues in Universal Credit are delivering it remotely from their homes, and that was perceived to be completely impossible pre-pandemic. Over 90% of our colleagues in the NICS are working remotely at the moment, and that is phenomenal. We did that overnight, and then pre-COVID, we got this understanding that there were 3 pillars that we really needed to focus on. First and foremost, our people and the policy and the processes that support them in how they do their work. And then technology. What technology do we equip our staff with and empower our staff with so that they can work differently, that they can work remotely? And finally, the accommodation bit evolves as the people and the policy and the processes change and the technology that go to support it. COVID slingshotted us into this. And as you said, David, I was appointed as kind of the SRO of the recovery for the NICS in terms of leading us to the new ways of working. Having formed a cross-departmental group at deputy secretary level to be able to keep people informed of what the rapidly changing environment is and do all the things that Brent had suggested there in regards to, COVID's for secure facilities for those who did have to go into the office as well, but also with always one eye onto the future as to we can't go back to the way we wanted to. We've proven that we can do it, but none of us, and unanimously across the permanent secretaries as well, nor do we ever want to go back to the way we were before. But we also recognize the current level of remote working isn't optimal either. We would like to see people problem solving together collaboratively. So we embarked on a process of, well, what does space look like now? And in fact, we have one project that was in design and it was actually in procurement for a contractor to rationalize our estate in James House. And we completely pulled the desk layout design and went back to each organization, some of which might even be here in this forum today, to rethink about how they're going to work into the future. And
just on that, sorry to butt in there, but staff's experience of working remotely and working from home will be very different.
Yes.
Some people hated it, some people were quite comfortable with it. How are we actually involving staff in redesigning the workplace and in encouraging and facilitating these new working habits, if you like? Like I like the notion that the office is somewhere you come to collaborate rather than you come to work. Mm-hmm. But how are we involving people in the design of that?
That's a really good question, and that having learned the lessons from the former, not former because it still exists, the Reform of Property Management program, where we needed to put people at the center of it. In developing that new ways of working, David, what we've done is we're coordinated across all the departments and running workshops with all the departments in terms of how are you going to work? What are the things that you want to stop? What are the things that you need to accelerate? What are the things that you want to innovate and actually amplify and do? And we're engaging from not just the senior management team, but right through the departments and getting an understanding of how people do their jobs. So they're informing, and what we're doing is taking all the common themes that come from that and making sure that policy reflects that in terms of our remote and home working policy, how space is reflected in that, and what technologies that they need to be able to work. So we're listening very, very carefully to the people who are doing the work to be able to inform things like the environment. And we have a visual here of we've changed our approach too, because we recognize we no longer need to rely on big centralized offices in Belfast, but we can do this on a more regional approach and promoting a more live where you work mentality, where people do want to drop into an office to meet colleagues, to collaborate, that they have space to do that. And there's been a lot of press coverage recently about the regional hubs, which we call Connect Twos. And we've done that because we want people to connect to the office, connect to their colleagues, connect to technology, to be able to collaborate and solve the challenging problems that they're working on. And the visual that will come up on your screen now shows where we actually are in Ballykelly. And if you think about the visual that Sue and Brent had up there in regards to the 3 floor plans, this represents the floor plan on the right-hand side, where it's collaboration space. There's only few desks there, where we're focusing more on that round table. There's a pod in the background there. There's a meeting room on the left just out of the sign there, acoustic separation, where people can actually sit down and collaborate and work. So we've taken the feedback from our departments and the staff and the way they want to work, and translated that into design, making sure that they're empowered with the technology and the software to be able to do. And we have more work to do. We have significant more work to do around the technology and working with our partners in BT to solve some of those issues as well. But our office has evolved effectively.
Okay, I'll maybe just pause, Anne, and just see whether there's any questions from the audience.
Absolutely, they're starting to come in. First of all, the distinction around the heads up and heads down spaces has really resonated with the audience, and thank you to Francis McCandless for pointing that out on the chat. I've 2 questions here. First one from Alison, which I'll put to BT, and Derek may have a view on it as well, and it's around the additional environmental benefits and carbon savings, etc., from this sort of work. Have you looked at that in detail?
Yes, let me take that one. We've thought a lot about that before, sort of at the start of the program, if you like. And I guess we have, in going from hundreds and hundreds of really poor buildings into a small number of modern buildings, there was a huge environmental benefit from that anyway. So just through being sort of more efficient and more modern, better heating, cooling, better airflows, biophilia in the buildings, those sorts of things. So there's a big advantage to that. And we've made sure in selecting our buildings and selecting the technologies within our buildings that we contribute as best we can to the net zero carbon targets that BT is sort of very rightly proud of, and working hard towards getting there as quickly as we can. So there's already a big environmental push. But what we've seen now, of course, with the different ways of working, is that we can add to that. If people are making less journeys, and if the technologies are actually enabling people to collaborate between offices much better and less travelling between sort of Manchester and London and Belfast and Bristol, then we can add on to those benefits that are already there, the sort of massive improvement in the carbon footprint from that travel side as well. So we're not sort of using it as one of our key performance metrics to track and report upon, but it's definitely a driving force behind the sort of the processes, the policies, and the building selections and the investments we're making.
Great, Derek?
We too are also measuring it, but unlike it, as yours is not a KPI in BT, ours is, and we're working very closely with our colleagues in DARA to measure the impact of our new way of working. Conversely, we're taking the sustainability agenda even a step further, because economic is one of the pillars in the sustainability agenda as well. And that whole addressing the regional imbalance is we're working, leveraging our estate and thinking differently about how we're working into the future to help address regional imbalance as well and promote economic activity in our regional town centres by people having that live where they work mentality. We've also, in terms of our regional hubs, have measured the distance, and we're trying to limit how far staff ever have to travel to get to an office or space to work in. And our current goal is 15 miles from where they live, that they have access to an NICS office to print or to collaborate, sit down and do some work as well. And we're measuring our reduction with our colleagues in DARA to prove the impact that we're having.
Great, thanks. I have a couple more questions. First of all, a tricky one, and it probably goes back to the culture piece from Adrian O'Doherty at Sport NI, and it's relating to how we can accommodate people who might refuse to go back to the office. Don't know who wants to take that one first.
Do you want to throw it to Sue?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, and we know that there will be people who are either because they believe it's the best place for them to get their work done, or they're anxious about returning to their workplace. And we do know that we will face that. We have been quite clear as a company to say that we do believe that offices have a really important part to play in the way we work. That, you know, we connect for good as a company, and that includes connecting our colleagues at the time, the right times to do their work. We're focusing on, you know, environments that allow people to get their best work done. We have a really clear home working policy that says we, of course, do allow for colleagues to be permanent home workers if it meets with the policy. It's whether it's to do with caring, or they've got, carers' passports or disability, or there's a range of criteria. But we are really hopeful to encourage colleagues into the workplace. Not 5 days a week, depending on what work they do, but that they will want to come to the office to collaborate with their colleagues. We have a policy, well, it's not a policy, sorry, I must be clear about that. We are setting out guidelines and a framework for leaders to use that we call smart working, which is about basically that. It's about having a smart approach to managing your team to make sure that they are in the office as is required and as is productive to get their best work done. For some teams, we think that will be, you know, more frequently than others. So if you're on contact centres and you're answering customer calls all day and you've got shift working, we do know that you can do that from home, but we believe that for some of those teams, it's better to be in the office more than it is to be at home. Others, knowledge workers, as you might call them, like the work I do, absolutely can be effectively done from a range of different buildings or from home, or sometimes 5 days a week, sometimes never in the office. We're trying to give managers these sorts of guidelines to help them with colleagues who would prefer to stay at home, to talk about when and why they might want to come into the office, why that's better for the team and for their customers that they serve, and when it's okay for them to be at home. I don't think we'll crack it overnight. I think we've got a journey to go on with colleagues who've got very used to working from home, but it's certainly our aspiration to keep that blend of flexibility of home and being in the office when the work needs it. Hopefully that answers enough without it being a binary answer.
Thank you. And Derek, if you have a view on that?
Yeah, we have the similar challenge. The reality is that whichever metaphor you want to use, Pandora's box is now open, or the genie is out of the bottle, and it's not going back in again. Our approach in terms of the policy is on a voluntary basis, and we work that with the departments and the business units. So depending on your role and the operations that you perform, we have the ability to work more flexibly and work remotely. The key for us is that we're working together in partnership. So what best suits the work that's being done, and being able to provide environments that actually make it attractive for staff to want to come back in the office and to connect with their staff as well. We also right now understand that mental health has become a really, really big issue for people and cases of isolation. And those who are ready to run back to the office because they're sick and tired of being on their own. But there are others, as David, you mentioned earlier, before this, that there are those who may become even more isolated, that the fact that they are so introverted to begin with want to continue to be on their own. And that's a job for leadership to be able to manage that, to understand what the core reasons are that are driving the behaviors and to address that. And that's something, as we move into this new world of hybrid working, there's going to be a different type of leadership that's required to manage these issues.
Thanks, Derek. And thanks to Heather Stanley, who's made a really interesting comment that it's interesting how when you consider the better quality collaborative discussions used to happen in the cafe and less with the former desk layouts. So that certainly seems to be the direction that we're going. Grania Long at the Housing Executive has raised a point which I think Sue had touched on in her earlier answer. It's interesting to hear more, or she's interested to hear more of the proposed design and function of the workplace where direct, i.e. face-to-face contact with the customer is the priority, and how does the panel see that changing? We go to Derek first.
Yes, well, the reality is, and I would hope my BT colleagues would have jumped in here. Most of the services that we're encouraging, and we talked about this earlier, that even GPs are now working towards more digitally led delivery of their services, and I think that's the general direction we're going. And as I said, that symbiotic relationship between accommodation, people, policy, and procedures, the way you do your work, and the technology, as they evolve, how the space that we use to facilitate our interactions with our customers will change. And I think we're really starting to think about that digital interface with our customers as opposed to the physical. There are things that we have to do face-to-face, and we continue to do that. But from my point of view, and working with my colleagues in the Department of Economy and our thinking about our estate, we would like to see those things moving into the high street to promote the footfall where the footfall needs to be, and those things that can be done really, really effectively digitally, that they should be done so.
If I can come in and maybe ask Brent to comment, because you're right, Derek, from BT's perspective, we do have that customer interface. Primarily in the retail side of our business, and you know, Brent will be able to talk more eloquently than I can in terms of what we're doing with our retail shops and you know, what we've done throughout the pandemic. But in terms of Grania's question and you know, the housing centre in Adelaide Street, you know, very, very popular place where there was an awful lot of face-to-face intervention and continues to have that requirement. It will be interesting to see what happens on the other side, because you know, I think your Connect 2 opportunity across regionally dispersed place will allow for the public service to be probably to prevent the visits to Belfast and hopefully have them in those conversations in the other places.
Boy, I hope Sue Wiley isn't on when you just said that.
Listen, Belfast is by far and away has an advantage over the rest of Northern Ireland, and Belfast will succeed, right? But what we need to do, you know, what the plan of levelling up in Northern Ireland is being done, and what you guys are doing is hopefully going to feed and water a lot more than just Belfast and Derry, right?
I suppose the big challenge when it comes to face-to-face service with the public is, in many areas we know there are people who, and I don't really like the term hard to reach, but there are people who have difficulty accessing public services and like the opportunity to go to an office to talk to somebody face-to-face. And quite often those would tend to be elderly people or people who are not you know, internet savvy, if you like. And it's what do we do to make sure that we don't leave people behind as we push further for more online access?
That's a constant challenge we face in terms of our service delivery in the public sector. We started a concept maybe 5 years ago, and it was perhaps 5 years too early, but it's gaining some real gaining real traction around the community hub concept, where we don't just locate public sector workers in an office doing back of house functions, but housing executive colleagues could be working with library NI colleagues, and in Scotland they've made it work between housing GPs and libraries working really, really effectively. And I think that's something on a cross-departmental and across central government basis we definitely do need to be thinking about, so that we do meet those people who may not get the same access to services as others.
Brent, is there anything you could share from BT and EE's experience in the high street?
Yeah, and I think it's probably a retail equivalent of the conversation just had there, which is that whilst you can do an awful lot of things online digitally, and for a lot of people that would be their preference and their go-to choice, there are lots of us who would rather talk to a person face to face. And if you're going to be buying something or having a different conversation, I'd rather a phone in particular, or I'm in the market for sofas at the moment. Trying to buy a sofa online, they all look nice, probably very uncomfortable. So I think we just need to recognise that different people are going to make different choices, and we've definitely tried to keep our retail stores open as much as we've been allowed to, recognising that it's a really important reason for people to want to go out, leave the home and go to the high street, with all the added benefits that brings with it, but also that people, fundamentally we enjoy interacting with other people, and we like being out and about and touching and feeling things. So I think the digital push is really important, but the choice is equally as important.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, panelists, and hopefully, Grania, that's helped with your considerations. Cherie Arnold has asked a big question of BT, but I think I'll put it to Derek as well. Has BT considered the impact of remote or blended working on productivity?
I'm happy to answer that. Yes, is the short answer. And actually, I think we were really pleasantly surprised in the early stages when literally, as panelists have already said, we were all sent home, in that productivity wasn't really impacted. And in fact, some of our kind of contact centre frontline teams were saying they were, feeling more productive. I think we've seen it really ebb and flow. I wish I could say, by the way, we had amazing productivity tools and measures, and I'm not sure we do in all of our roles. So a lot of this will be sort of anecdata and what's being perceived, but it's definitely been an ebb and flow. And I think, as Derek said before, we've also had challenges with colleagues who've been suffering from mental health, whether that's through isolation or anxiety, and also just low energy. We've noticed things like lots of people on calls not having their cameras on, being fairly absent, not being really feeling very present. And I think, I've called it the Corona roller coaster, and I think we've all been on it, and I can feel very connected and very productive one day and the next day a bit less so. And I think we've just seen that, everybody's been responding to it in a very human way. So I think for productivity going forward, we, as I've said, we do believe that the physical workspace plays a big part, and the ability to come together, to collaborate, to problem solve, to create, to product create, to test with customers will be really important to do that physically. But we are keen that remote working and the hybrid working is a big part of that way of working. And we think that if we get that right, then productivity should skyrocket. And another big thing for humans is choice, I think, and where we've definitely accelerated from perhaps a more traditional culture of, home working is home shirking. I'm sure you've all seen that kind of stuff, to a belief now and a trust in colleagues that we can do our best work where and sometimes when we feel able to choose, then that in itself can drive productivity. And then the final thing, of course, is leadership, leading teams in a way that people know what their outcomes are and what their productivity is being measured on, and leading teams for that will be obviously, as ever, the critical enabler to that.
So could I just quickly come in on that, Sue? I'm just wondering, are you adjusting your performance management systems in any way just to cater for these new circumstances, particularly the point about, different people have different preferences about how they work, and how you make sure, given that you're managing people remotely, that, everybody is sort of pulling their weight, for want of a better term?
There's loads of work going on right now in our kind of HR function around transforming a lot of those kind of underpinning practices. So right now, the answer is no, we're not kind of wholesale putting a new performance management process and system, but we are in the background doing an entirely separate kind of HR transformation program. So I'm sure that will change that as that programme evolves. Right now, I think it's been about enabling leaders to think about being outcome-led and making sure that our kind of goal setting and our performance management processes is about focusing on outcomes, not presenteeism. And then it's linked with the smart working that I mentioned before about working together with colleagues and teams to say how are we best going to deliver on our outcomes based on the work that we do, the team that we're in, and the roles that we perform. And I think then behind that will come a performance management process on the back of our HR transformation programme.
Great. Thank you, Sue. Derek, have you anything to add from the public sector
We've noticed quite similarly in terms of our performance reviews, we are now focusing on outcomes oriented, on deliverables as opposed that are very concise, that people can be responsible for regardless of where they're working, be it in the office or from home. But the recently published NISRA survey, our people survey that we did, had our highest engagement scores that we've ever seen across the NICS. And one of the questions asked people, do they feel more productive working from home? And correspondingly asked line managers whether they felt their staff were productive. Now, it is a qualitative measure in regards to its subjectiveness, but in terms of those scores, overwhelmingly, people felt more productive, and that was supported by line managers' perception of productivity as well. So we are very confident that this remote working hasn't impacted. One of the things I would caution on is that how much is that due down to the fact that maybe we're not switching off at 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
And maybe we're switching on earlier and our work day has perhaps got bigger. And I notice our colleagues down south are legislating for this switch off period as well. And maybe that's something in the future that we do need to think about. But on a whole, our productivity has anecdotally and within our survey results seems to have improved.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that personally because I know before I retired, happily, my working practice had evolved into waking up in the morning, logging on, and then not really logging off until you go to bed at night. Now, you weren't sort of slave to the laptop all day, but that, it was there. And I think that was fine in response to a crisis. But I think if there's an expectation created that people are going to be logged on all the time, then I think we will face problems down the road.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
Trust is a really important aspect of all of this. And if you've got the right people and you trust them, then they have a much more agility to do what they need to do outside of work in their working day. And you trust them with the outcomes being measured. And I think that's where that's where you get to the really good stuff, is when you've got the good people doing their work in a way that works for them and for the company.
And thank you to Judith Clark for the observation. Really, the best of both worlds is key as long as the customer remains at the heart of what we in the public service do. The final question I have in front of me at the minute from Rachel Edwards at the Strategic Investment Board. Are we, or how are we, working with the education sector to align with their learnings of COVID and what their future approach might be so that young people are ready for this new way of work, or may be able to influence it? Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Do you want to think, and I'll give you a little bit of a chance to think. I think we have there's a huge amount of work to be done in terms of our kids and education in its broadest sense. And whilst there's been an awful lot of activity, and I feel for the teachers and for the families and for the kids, primarily in primary and secondary education, we haven't got it to the optimum yet, and technology is going to be a big enabler for that going forward. But then you've got those who are socially disadvantaged that maybe don't have the tech in the house, and we BT, the telco industry in its broader sense, have leaned in to try and help in a lot of instances, and with the Education Authority and NI we've done quite a bit, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And if we are going to continue in a world that's going to be similar to what we've come out of, I think it needs to be one of the top priorities for government going forward.
It's a really good question, and I'm a school governor, and I know that the schools have really had to wrestle with this problem, and universities as well. And actually, I do feel for anybody that's been to university and the through the pandemic, like they really have missed out on a lot of the experience that you would normally hope to get from being at university. But I think certainly our children have had to cope with this as well, and I think
And
that's
our homeschooling parents.
and our homeschooling parents, indeed, yes. And I think that's actually an issue that's been rightly flagged up as something that does need a bit more analysis and research.
Great. Any panelists, anything to add to that before we conclude? Because our hour has flown by. We have a couple of minutes left.
Not to
No, I don't think so. I think there was. I think it's going to be one we're going to have to watch really closely as a society over the next few years, because undoubtedly the impact has been enormous over the last 12 months. But I'm not sure we'll see the real impacts for a while yet.
I think economically, if I look at it as an employer in Northern Ireland, we've north of 3,000 people working here. It's always been a fantastic place to recruit and to deliver capability from. But in parallel, over the last couple of months, we've seen some of the madness and badness that happens. And young kids are out doing stuff that they don't really understand that they're doing. That's not about COVID, it's not about it, but it is about how do we get those kids infused and given a vision and a focus for the future. And I think that's a societal question that definitely needs to percolate to the top.
Very interesting comment just in from Janice Scallon at the Department of Education. She's rightly pointed out that our kids are leading the way. Their entire learning flipped during the pandemic. They're coding in primary schools now. The kids are way ahead of us when it comes to the tech. And thanks for highlighting that, Janice. So as I say, we've just a couple of minutes to wrap up. So I'm going to hand over to Paul and David for some concluding thoughts.
Listen, hopefully it's been really useful for the audience. From BT's perspective, I'm really looking forward personally to moving into what will be a newly designed, a newly furnished and a net carbon compliant building in a place where I will collaborate going forward. And it's not somewhere that I suspect I will go 5 days a week in the future. I will do the head down stuff at home. But I will be encouraging my team to come in, not just because it's good. This morning's been fantastic, getting to meet people in the flesh and actually be in people's company, and that's going to be ever so more important in the future. So, thanks to Sue and to Brent for coming on board, and any further questions or anybody who'd like some more insight into the Better Workplace programme, please come through Anna, and I've no doubt we'll be able to furnish them with some more insight.
Well, I'd just like to add my thanks to Paul, Brent, Sue and Derek for their insights, and I think it has been a stimulating conversation. I'm not going to throw any last-minute curveball questions at anybody, but I think, like Paul, I think if people do have any other questions or concerns, do feed them back to us, and we'll seek to answer them. I like to be optimistic all the time, and I do think there are actually huge opportunities for us in terms of creating a better place to work in the future. And I think this morning we've heard some of those good ideas, and I just hope everybody online has been able to will be able to take something away from this discussion. So thank you all.
Thank you.